For a year, a woman I'd never properly met waved at me every morning at 7:15, and I told myself it was just the kind of thing people did on a street like ours. Then came the one morning I didn't wave back, and 10 minutes later she was on my porch in her house slippers, breathing too fast, looking at me like she'd watched the world take a person without asking first. That's the part I still can't get past, not that she crossed the street, but that I'd spent the whole year sure I was the one being kind. Her name was Clara Easton, and she lived directly across from me in a pale blue house with white trim and a porch swing that never once moved the entire time I knew her. I knew her name the way you know names in a neighborhood. Her mail landed in my box now and then. The old woman 2 doors down had said it once, but I had never heard her speak until that morning, when she said mine. Evan, first time. It landed strange. My own name in her voice after 12 months of nothing but a hand lifted behind glass. I fix appliances for a living, which means I spend my days walking into the worst week of strangers' kitchens with a flashlight and a level voice. Washers that flood a basement, refrigerators that quit in July with a month of groceries inside, ovens that smell like something died in the wall. I like the work because machines are honest. A washer doesn't tell you it's fine while water runs under the cabinets. A fridge doesn't pretend it hasn't been straining for half a year. They break for findable reasons: a worn belt, a bad relay, a cracked hose, and you find the reason. Name it, and either fix it or replace it, and either way you leave the kitchen better than you found it. People were never that simple for me. That was most of my problem, if I'm honest about it. I'd been divorced 2 years by the morning Clara knocked, though paper divorced and actually divorced sit a long way apart. Natalie moved out of our old place first. Then I moved out. Then the bank got involved. Because neither of us could carry the house alone, and neither of us could say out loud how much of the marriage had been propped up by rooms we no longer knew how to stand in. I rented above a barber shop for a while. Then my uncle passed and left me just enough for a down payment, and I bought the cheapest house on Maple Row, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, front steps that leaned left, a basement that smelled nervous when it rained, kitchen cabinets some hopeful person had painted white without sanding first. The street had cracked sidewalks and deep porches and maples that went gold for about 3 perfect weeks every October. It was mine, or close enough that I quit arguing the point. I moved in on a Saturday in late fall and barely registered the blue house that first week. Clara's curtains opened in the morning and closed before dark. Her trash went out Tuesday night and came back before noon Wednesday. The garden beds were tidy and nothing bright grew in them. You can live across from that kind of quiet a long time and never learn its shape. The first wave was an accident. Back then, my job had me timed down to the minute: coffee at 6:40, boots at 6:55, cooler at 7:05, keys by 7:10, truck rolling by 7:15 if I wanted to beat the buses. So on maybe my 4th morning there, I stepped out with a travel mug and a stack of invoices, and across the street Clara stood at her kitchen window with a mug of her own. We caught each other in that half second where 2 strangers decide whether they've made eye contact or become neighbors. I lifted my hand. She lifted hers. That was the whole of it. No music, no feeling in the chest, a hand going up and a hand coming back. Next morning she was there again. And so was I, and by the end of November it had folded itself into the routine without asking me. Coffee, boots, cooler, keys, wave. Small enough to be nothing, steady enough to slowly turn into something. And here's where I started noticing the parts that didn't add up, though it'd take me a year to understand them. She was always at the window a minute before me, never after. She never opened that window, not in fall, not in spring. She never came onto the porch. If I was loading tools into the truck, she stayed behind the curtain until I'd pulled off the street, and only then would she step out for the mail. The wave was the one bridge she'd allow, and I kept thinking I'd ask her about it someday, and I kept not asking, and the not knowing just sat there in the back of every morning like a question I'd set down somewhere and couldn't find again. I made up stories about her the way you do with a neighbor. Worked from home, I figured some quiet job, bookkeeping maybe, 8 hours at a laptop without needing another voice. She looked younger than me, hard to tell from across the street. Dark hair, always a mug. One December morning, she had a red scarf wrapped around her neck inside the house, and I nearly went over to ask if her furnace had quit, then pictured how that would sound. Hello. Woman I've waved at for 6 weeks. Is your heat broken, or are you simply cold, and waved instead? She waved back with the scarf still on. The little wrongness of it stuck with me the rest of the drive. In January, a storm dropped a foot of snow and my first 2 jobs canceled. So I stood in my own kitchen at 7:14 in sweatpants, grateful I didn't have to chip ice off the truck. At 7:15, I glanced across out of pure habit, and there she was at the window. She raised her hand. I laughed before I could help it, then raised mine from inside my own kitchen, and she smiled, the first real one I'd seen. Small and surprised and gone in a second, but real. I caught myself thinking about that smile at a job 2 hours later, which embarrassed me enough that I didn't examine it. My life was narrow in those days. Work, groceries, bills, bad sleep, repeat. I talked all day, but customer talk isn't conversation. It's diagnosis and price and apology. Yes, ma'am, the part has to be ordered. No, sir, off and on won't fix a dead compressor. I wish it were cheaper, too. Sundays, my mother sometimes called to ask if I was meeting anyone, and I'd say I was busy, and she'd say busy isn't a life, and I'd say it beat drama, and she'd sigh a whole essay into one breath. Natalie emailed every couple months about taxes or an old account, and each one pressed a bruise I was working hard to ignore. The strange thing was I didn't want her back. What I missed was the version of me that still believed back was a place a person could get to. Spring came late. The maples put out red buds, people cracked their windows, mowers started up on Saturdays. Clara's porch swing still didn't move. But one April morning, her kitchen window was open a few inches at the bottom, and crossing to the truck I heard a piano, not a recording, a person. Soft and uneven, stopping to repeat a line, missing a note, trying again. I turned before I could stop myself. She was at the sill with her hand on it, looking caught, like I'd overheard something private. I lifted my hand. She lifted hers. The piano stopped. Next morning there was no music, and I had this dumb urge to apologize for a thing I hadn't done. It was a customer who told me the rest. Mrs. Hanley, over on the next block, a retired librarian with sharp glasses and a sharper memory, who poured me coffee while I worked her dishwasher and hovered in the doorway like the machine might confess with an audience. She asked which house I'd bought, and when I said 38, she said, "Oh, across from Clara Easton." I kept my head under the sink. "Pretty young widow," she said. "Blue house. Keeps to herself." The wrench slipped in my hand. "Widow, sad business," she went on, dropping her voice though there was no one else in the room. "Husband passed, almost 2 years back. Quick, whatever it was. Taught music at the elementary, I think, or maybe she did. One of them. She used to be everywhere. Concerts, church, the summer program. Then after, she just stopped, like somebody turned the lights off. I tightened the hose connection and said that right, and she said, "She's sweet though, always waves." I asked before I could think better of it, "She does? And Mrs.?" Hanley looked at me with eyes that were kind and far too interested and said, "To you, apparently, I finished that dishwasher in record time and drove the rest of the day with the math going in my chest. 2 years a widow. A husband who taught music. A piano played badly through a cracked open window in April. And me, every single morning, waving at her at 7:15, and I didn't yet know why that number would matter, only that the whole picture had quietly tilted, and a wave I'd thought was nothing was clearly, for her, something I didn't have the shape of yet. That evening I stood at my own front window pretending I wasn't watching her house while watching her house. Her kitchen light was on, her shadow carrying something from counter to table. "Like somebody turned the lights off, Mrs." Hanley had said, except the light was on, and the woman under it had waved at me 400 mornings and never once crossed the street. Next morning I waved like always, and nothing in me felt like always. Her face gave me nothing to read calm, no pity asked for, no permission to know what I now half knew. So I did the only halfway decent thing left and acted normal. Summer made the block loud. Bikes, sprinklers, grills, porch talk past dark. Clara stayed in, but small signs of life began gathering around the wave anyway. She opened the window more. She set a basil plant on the sill, and the morning after I spent a brutal Saturday rebuilding my leaning front steps, I came out to find a paper bag hung off my porch rail, a bottle of water, a little container of cookies, a note in careful handwriting. The steps looked safer. No name. I looked across, and there she was in the window with the face of a woman ready to deny the whole thing. I held up the bag. She lifted one shoulder. The cookies were lemon shortbread and better than any cookie has the right to be. That was the shape of us. Small things sent the long way around, never hand to hand. A few weeks on, a delivery truck clipped her mailbox and left it leaning like it had quit on the federal government, so I reset the post one evening while she stayed inside. And next morning there was a note taped to the inside of her kitchen glass. Thank you. And under it, smaller, sorry about the cookies. I overbaked them. I laughed hard enough to slop coffee down my shirt, then wrote, "You did not," on a square of cardboard from a filter box and held it up from my driveway. And she read it and smiled. And it should have felt childish, and instead it felt like the safest thing that had happened to me in 2 years. By September, I'd admit to myself that I looked forward to 7:15 not in some way I'd be ashamed of, just in the way that made the morning a degree less empty. When you live alone long enough, small things start carrying more than their size. A light across the street. A note about cookies. A hand behind glass telling you that you'd been seen leaving the house again. What I didn't know, what I had no way to know, was that she was holding on to the same minute for reasons I couldn't have guessed, and that the morning I finally failed to show up, it would nearly come apart in her hands. That morning started with an email from Natalie. "Final update," the subject line said. I read it while the coffee brewed. The old house had sold. Closing went through yesterday. She and a man named Greg were getting married in December. She'd be taking his name, so if any paperwork came to me with Miller on it, I should send it along. Hope you're well. Natalie. Nothing cruel in it, which made it worse. The last place our marriage had existed in furniture and bad paint was now somebody else's problem, and she was marrying a man who'd probably never gone silent for a week because he couldn't admit he was hurt. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even jealous. I was, all at once, tired in a way that went past the bones, the specific tired of a man finding out he's been quietly erased, and nobody had to even raise their voice to do it. The coffee finished, and I didn't pour it. My boots sat by the door, and I didn't put them on. My phone buzzed at 7:02 fridge in Worthington, no cooling, possible sealed system, and I watched the screen go dark. At 7:15 I was still at the table in yesterday's shirt, the room gray, and for the first time in a year I let the minute pass without me. I knew she'd be at the window. I knew it and could not make myself stand up. At 7:25 the knock came. 3 sharp, then 2 soft, like whoever it was had already lost the argument with herself and come anyway. When I opened the door, Clara was on my porch in slippers and a gray cardigan, hair twisted up wrong, breathing like she'd run, eyes wet. "Are you okay?" she said. After a year of silence, after never once setting foot off her own side of the street, "Are you okay?" To me, first thing, I should have said something simple. Instead, I looked past her at my cold truck and her open curtains and said, "I missed work," which was a stupid thing to say. She looked at me like it wasn't stupid at all. "I know," she said, and something about how she said it cracked the rest of the morning open. "You didn't wave," she said. "No, you always wave." "I know." Her hands were shaking, not for show, just a little, and that's when I understood this wasn't ordinary concern. "Clara," I said, careful with the name. "Do you want to come in?" She glanced back at her own house like it might call her home, and for a second I thought she'd bolt across the street. Then she nodded and stepped inside like a person testing ice. The place wasn't fit for company. Mug in the sink, mail on the counter, clean towels in a pile on the couch because folding had lost a fight with exhaustion. She didn't seem to see any of it. She stopped in the kitchen with one hand on the back of a chair. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought something happened to you." "Something did," I said. "Just not the kind you knock on a door for." And because she'd crossed a street from me, I didn't lie. I told her my ex-wife had sold our old house and was getting remarried, and that I'd thought I was fine about it and found out at the kitchen table that I wasn't. I don't want her back, I said. I just didn't expect to feel erased before breakfast. She pulled out a chair without asking and sat, cardigan wrapped around her like armor. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she said quietly, "Being erased is different from being left." I looked at her. "Left still means there was a door," she said, eyes on the table. "Erased means people start acting like the room was always empty." It landed somewhere I wasn't braced for. "You know about that," I said. She nodded once. "My husband died at 7:15 in the morning. The kitchen went dead still. Outside a truck rolled past slow. Somewhere a garage door went up. Her hands stayed folded. He was making coffee," she said. "I was upstairs looking for an earring," which is a ridiculous thing to remember. But grief keeps the ridiculous details. I heard the mug break. By the time the ambulance came, he was gone. His name was Daniel. He taught music at the elementary school. He played the piano badly when he was tired and beautifully when he forgot anyone could hear him. The open window in April. The piano. I didn't move. After, mornings were the impossible part, she said. Everyone warns you about the nights. The nights are bad. But mornings ask you to start again, and that's the cruelty of them. For months, I didn't open the curtains. Then, almost a year on, I made myself stand in the kitchen at 7:15. I don't even know why. Punishment, maybe. And you came out of your house with coffee down your shirt and your hair doing something genuinely unfortunate, and you waved. My hair was fine, I said, because I couldn't take the weight head on. It was not. A small, sad, real smile, then gone. I told myself it was nothing. A new neighbor being polite. But you did it again the next morning. And the next. And after a while I was getting out of bed because at 7:15 a stranger was going to walk to his truck and lift his hand like the day had permission to keep going. She looked at me. Every morning, you waved at me at the exact minute the world ended. And every morning, for 1 second, 7:15 got to be something else too. I had to look away. There's a kind of gratitude that's too intimate to take while it's being handed to you. You should have told me, I said, and regretted it instantly. She didn't take offense. I couldn't, she said, because then it would be a thing, and things can be taken away. Then she looked around my plain kitchen and said, "This is the first house on this side of the street I've walked into since Daniel died. I've made it to the sidewalk a few times. Once to the mailbox. Never across. Not alone." And when I asked why today, her eyes filled, and she said, "Because if you were gone too, I'd have to admit the world was moving without asking me first." I wanted to fix the sentence. But people aren't appliances and grief isn't a loose wire, so I just said, "I'm here." And she closed her eyes, and when she opened them a tear had gone down her cheek, and she said, "I know." Neither of us fixed anything that morning. I called my dispatcher and said I was sick, which wasn't all the way a lie. She texted someone she'd been meant to see and said she couldn't make it. We sat at my table until the coffee went cold, talking in careful pieces her music classes she never officially quit, just took leave from until the school stopped asking and offered to box up her room. My marriage that didn't explode so much as thin out until we were two polite, lonely people in adjoining rooms. She listened, like listening was a place she could finally set something heavy down. That was the beginning, though it didn't look like one. Not a date, not a confession. The next morning I came out at 7:15 and she was at her window, and she did a new thing. She opened it, and her voice came across the street thin, but it crossed. "Morning, Evan." I stood by my truck with my chest aching like a fool and said, "Morning, Clara." For weeks that was the whole growth of it. Measured in inches. Some mornings, cold one. Some mornings, your basil made it. Some mornings just the wave, because words were too much. Then one Saturday in November she was on her porch. Not behind glass on the porch, gripping the rail, boots instead of slippers, coat buttoned crooked, wearing a look that dared me to make it a big deal. I was raking leaves badly. "Morning," I called. "It's 11, she said. "I'm behind." She eyed the mess of my yard, I noticed. Then, looking at the street between us like it was a river, "Would you like coffee?" On my porch. I crossed slow, not because I thought she'd break, but because speed feels like pressure to someone spending all the courage she's got. 2 mugs waited on a little table. 1 blue, 1 white. I took the white. Her swing creaked when she sat. I took the chair, though I didn't want to because wanting had started being a regular problem around her. I learned her in pieces after that. Never daily she needed room between brave things. She hated carnations because funeral homes overused them. She kept Daniel's piano but only played with the windows open because a closed room made the music feel trapped. She had a polite neighbor voice and a real one underneath that was lower and drier and funnier. She didn't like being called strong. People say strong when they mean quiet, she told me once. I was quiet because I didn't know what sound to make. She learned me too that I ate too fast, that I kept every spare screw from every job because you never know, which she said sounded like a cry for help, that I didn't mind being alone half as much as I minded going invisible inside it. In February, she stood in my kitchen while I fixed a crooked drawer pull and said, "You repair things with an alarming amount of emotional restraint." "I'm working through a lot with this screwdriver," I said. And she said, "I can tell," and I wanted to kiss her so suddenly I nearly dropped the pull. She saw it land on my face and stepped back, not far, just enough. And I let her, because that was the deal we hadn't said out loud. Then I got scared and pulled back myself, and one morning I almost didn't wave, not out of sadness, but fear. Afraid I'd become important in a space that wasn't mine. Afraid I'd turned into one more man who thought being needed gave him rights. She caught it by Friday, of course she did, and showed up at my door with 2 bakery muffins and said, "Say whatever made you start treating me like I'm made of old glass." So I did. "I don't want to be disrespectful," I said. "To Daniel. To you. To what you had. Sometimes I think I'm just standing in a place grief made empty." She set the muffin down. "Evan, you are not replacing my husband," she said. And when I said I knew, she said, "No, you're saying the right answer. Hear the real one. Daniel isn't a position. He isn't a chair you can sit in or a job that opened up. He was my husband, and I love him still, and that love is not a room you walked into and took over." Her eyes went to the window, to her own house across the way. For a long time I thought if life moved, it meant I was leaving him behind. So I kept everything still. The house. The clock. Me? The clock? Her face changed. She hadn't meant to say it. She stood. "Come with me." I'd never been inside the blue house. It smelled of coffee and lemon and old wood. The front room held the piano, a green chair, a shelf of photographs turned not face down but slightly aside, like she'd struck a bargain with memory. She led me to the kitchen, smaller than mine, warmer, yellow curtains, blue mug by the sink, basil on the sill. And on the wall above the stove, a round white clock with its hands stopped at 7:15. I stared at it. "It stopped the morning he died," she said. "Battery probably, I never changed it." The refrigerator hummed. Every morning she had stood under that clock. Every morning I had waved at the frozen minute on its face. "I didn't know," I said, the sentence I kept landing on with her. "I know," she said. "I didn't want you to replace him, Evan. I wanted proof that time could hold more than one thing." She took the clock down and turned it over and found the battery door and stopped, her thumb on it. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "That's okay," I said. "I want to be. That's okay too." She held it against her chest like something with a heartbeat, and when she finally looked up and saw the question on my face, she said, "Yes." And I put my arms around her, not tight, not a claim, just enough to lean into, and after a stiff second she folded in, forehead to my shoulder. The stopped clock caught between us, and cried without making a sound. I held her in the kitchen where time had quit, and I understood that if love came for us, it would have to come gently, no forcing, no clearing the past out to make room. She didn't fix the clock that day, but she started teaching again, one afternoon a week, with the school music program. And the morning of her first day back, she stood on her porch with her keys while I pretended to organize tools in my truck. "You're hovering," she called. "I needed a wrench. You're holding a flashlight." I looked down. So I was. "Wish me luck," she said. "You don't need luck." She gave me a look. "Good luck," I corrected. "Better." She came home that afternoon and stood by her car a second and smiled. And the next morning she waved with both hands like a kid showing off. And I applauded from my driveway. and Mrs. Hanley walked past and asked if there was news. I told her there wasn't. It wasn't quite true. The news was Clara had started humming again when she watered the basil. By spring, wanting wasn't something I could keep pretending around. On her porch one evening, sharing strawberries she'd overbought, she nodded at my house, glowing dark across. The way except for the light I always forgot to kill. You leave lights on a lot. I know. I like it, she said. Your house looks like someone might be awake. I told her plainly that I had feelings for her, that I needed to stop pretending I was just a good neighbor. I'm scared, she said. Me too. I still love him. You should. I'm not asking you to stop. She reached across the gap between the chairs and took my hand, and we sat like that a long time, no kiss, no promise. Just her hand in mine and the porch light burning across the street. The kiss came later, in my kitchen, because she was helping me cook and I ruined the rice. You repair washing machines, she said into the pot. Rice isn't a washing machine. It's water and timing. She took the pot from me, laughing, and when she turned she was closer than I'd judged, and the laughing stopped and she said, I want to kiss you, and I said that would be very okay, and she did soft, brief, a little unsure and pulled back and whispered, still okay? And I said, more than. She put her forehead to my chest and I held her there in the smell of scorched rice and something starting. It didn't make life simple. Healing doesn't. Some mornings 7:15 still found her pale at the window, and some mornings she didn't come at all, and I taught myself not to panic. Some days she texted a single word quiet, which meant she was alive, but the day was heavy, and I'd text back here. I had my own bad days. Natalie's wedding photos surfaced online through some chain of tagged strangers, and I spent an hour feeling foolish over a life I no longer wanted, and Clara came by with takeout and said, being happy for someone and hurt by the proof of it aren't opposites. We learned each other slowly, when to step in, when to leave room. Then, almost a year after she first knocked, she called me at 7:05 one morning and said, don't leave yet. Come over at 7:15. When I crossed, her door was open and she stood in the kitchen with no armor I could see, the stopped clock on the table beside a fresh battery. You sure? I asked. No. That's allowed. I don't want to do it alone. You don't have to. She picked it up, hands shaking, and didn't set it down. I thought fixing it would feel like betrayal, she said. And now? Now I think leaving it stopped forever is just another way of letting that one morning keep him. She turned it over, worked the old battery out such a small sound for such a large thing, and pressed the new one in. The second hand twitched once, twice, then swept. She made a noise I'd never heard from her. Half sob, half laugh, hand clapped over her mouth, and the clock ticked on the table. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady time, doing the one thing time does. She set the hands right and hung it back on the wall. 7:18. For the first time in 2 years, Clara Easton's kitchen clock was wrong in the ordinary way, 3 minutes slow. And running. She leaned on the counter and cried, and I held her when she reached for me. Not before. That part mattered. We carried coffee out to the porch after. The maples were just turning at the edges, my truck sat across the street, I was late to my first job and couldn't make myself care. I'm going to be okay, she said. Not today. Eventually, I think I actually believe that now. I took her hand and said I believed it too. Mrs. Hanley came by and pretended not to stare, and Clara waved at her, and Mrs. Hanley looked so pleased she nearly walked off the sidewalk, and Clara laughed, and a year before, she'd crossed the street in her slippers because one missing wave made her sure the world had taken someone else without warning. And now she sat beside me with her own clock ticking behind her in the house she'd kept so carefully still. I left for work at 7:15 that morning. She walked me to the porch in my old sweatshirt with coffee for us both, handed me my mug, said, "Don't be late. I'm always on time. You were late the day I met you properly. You showed up before I could be late with any dignity. You had no dignity. You were wearing one black sock and one blue one." I looked down out of reflex, and she smiled. I waved from the driveway. She waved from the porch. And just before I got in the truck, I looked across at her open kitchen window, where the clock was moving and the blue mug sat on the sill, and I thought about how for a whole year I'd believed I was only waving good morning to a quiet woman with sad eyes, and how the entire time, behind that glass, my one small, ordinary kindness had been the thread she was holding to stay in the world, and hers, without my ever knowing it, had been doing the very same thing for me.